"Mama, please, let's go home." Angela Reed froze in the hallway, her coat already in her hand. Behind her, near the staff break room, her 9-year-old son stood on the cold floor in thin socks, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His red hoodie hung loose on his small shoulders. A worn blanket dragged behind him like a tired flag. The last bus would leave in 7 minutes. Then, from room 214, an old man's shaking voice called through the half-open door. "Please, don't let me die alone." Angela turned slowly. One child needed his mother to come home. One dying stranger needed her to stay, and before sunrise, the choice she made would leave the whole ward speechless. At 11:58 that winter night, Angela was only the poor night nurse in faded blue scrubs, standing beneath a humming hallway light with an unpaid electric bill folded in her purse and $12 left in her checking account. By morning, every person at Maple Haven Care Center would know her name, but in that moment, she was simply a tired mother trying to decide how much of her heart one woman could give before there was nothing left for herself. Maple Haven sat on the edge of a small Pennsylvania town where winter came early and stayed too long. After midnight, the building grew quiet, but not peaceful. The silence had weight. It held the soft beeping of machines, the whisper of oxygen tubes, the wheels of medication carts, and the unanswered loneliness of people whose families had slowly stopped visiting. Angela knew that kind of silence. She had worked the night shift for 6 years. She knew which residents were afraid of the dark, which ones pretended to sleep so they would not feel like a burden, and which rooms needed a little extra kindness after the other nurses had finished checking boxes on a chart. She was 42, African-American with warm brown skin, tired kind eyes, and dark hair pulled into a neat low bun. Her shoes were clean but worn at the soles. Her scrubs had been washed so often the blue had faded at the pockets. Over them she wore a gray cardigan with one repaired sleeve, the kind of thing wealthy people called old and working people called still useful. Some of the younger nurses liked to whisper about her. Reed brought her kid again, one had said earlier, near the supply closet. "She's always got some problem," another replied. Maybe if she stopped staying late for free, she could fix her own life. Angela had heard them. She heard everything. But answering every unkind word was a luxury she had never been able to afford. Pride did not pay rent. Pride did not buy groceries. Pride did not sit beside a frightened patient at midnight and remind him that he was still a person. Caleb, her son, had come with her because there had been no other choice. The neighbor who usually watched him had gone to the emergency room that afternoon. The after-school program closed at 6. Angela could not miss another shift, not with rent already late and groceries stretched thin enough to make dinner out of toast, applesauce, and the last 2 eggs. So Caleb had followed her to Maple Haven with a backpack full of homework, a library book, and a peanut butter sandwich Angela had cut in half to make it look like more. "Just tonight," she had whispered. He had nodded like a child who had heard that promise before and loved his mother too much to argue. Now he stood in the hallway, shivering a little, his eyes fixed on her coat. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm tired." Angela's heart tightened so hard it almost hurt. "I know, baby. Are we going to miss the bus?" She looked down the hall toward room 214. The call light still blinked. Inside that room lay Samuel Price, 87 years old, white, thin as folded paper, with silver hair combed carefully to one side and pale blue eyes that carried the sorrow of a man trying not to be afraid. He had arrived 3 months earlier with 2 suitcases, a shoebox of old photographs, a brass pocket watch, and no family member who ever returned a call. His chart said he had no close relatives. The staff said he was difficult. Angela had learned long ago that difficult often meant lonely in a language no one wanted to translate. She stepped toward the room. Caleb's voice followed her, smaller now. "Mama?" Angela stopped and looked back at him. There are moments in life when a woman does not choose between right and wrong. She chooses between 2 different heartbreaks. "Sit in the chair by the nurse's station," she said gently. "Wrap the blanket around you. I'll be right there where you can see me." Caleb looked toward the old man's room. "Is he scared?" Angela swallowed. "Yes." Caleb was silent for a moment, then he nodded. Not like a child obeying, but like a child who had already learned too much about fear. Angela entered room 214. Samuel Price lay against his pillow, breathing shallowly. On the bedside table sat his brass pocket watch, a small black notebook, and a yellowed envelope, folded so many times the paper had softened like cloth. Angela had noticed that notebook before. Sometimes, when a call light blinked too long down the hall, Samuel would mark something in it with a trembling hand. She had assumed it was only an old man's habit of counting lonely minutes. "I'm sorry," he said. I shouldn't have called. That's what the button is for. I thought I heard someone leaving. Angela pulled the chair closer to his bed. You heard me. His fingers trembled toward the envelope. My wife used to read to me, he said. Evelyn, she passed 7 years ago. The name changed the room. It made the walls seem less white, the machines less cold. I kept one of her letters, he continued. I used to know every word. But tonight, I can't see the lines. Angela glanced through the open door. Caleb had curled into the chair by the nurse's station. The blanket pulled up to his chin. The last bus would come and go without them. Tomorrow morning he would be tired at school. Angela would be tired at work. Life would not become easier because she chose kindness. Samuel lowered his eyes. I don't want to be trouble. Nurse Reed. Angela looked at the old man, and in his face she saw every person who had ever apologized for needing comfort, every patient who had apologized for being slow, every mother who had apologized for being poor, every child who had apologized for being hungry, every lonely soul who had mistaken abandonment for something they deserved. She took off her coat and placed it over the back of the chair. You are not trouble, Mr. Price. Samuel looked at her as if those words had reached some locked room inside him. Angela picked up Evelyn's letter with both hands, careful as if she were lifting something sacred. Would you like me to read it now? For a long moment, Samuel could only nod. Outside, snow fell softly over Pennsylvania. Down the hall, Angela's son slept under a thin blanket, waiting for a bus they had already missed. And in room 214, after her shift had ended, after the world had decided Samuel Price was no one's responsibility anymore, Angela Reed opened an old letter and gave a dying man back the sound of love. What she did not know was that before dawn, Samuel would leave behind one final letter of his own, and hidden inside it was a secret that had been waiting 20 years to find her. Angela unfolded the old letter slowly, as if the paper itself might break under the weight of being remembered. Samuel Price watched her hands. They were not soft hands. They were working hands, dark and steady, with short, clean nails and a faint burned scar near one thumb. But they held Evelyn's letter as if it were something sacred, not just a piece of paper left beside a dying man's bed. That was the difference. Most people at Maple Haven touched Samuel like a task. They turned him, lifted him, adjusted him, charted him. They were not cruel. Cruelty would have been easier to name. What hurt him most was the quiet efficiency of being treated like room 214 instead of Samuel Price. Angela did not treat him that way. The bedside lamp cast a small circle of gold over the blanket. Outside the window, snow drifted across the dark Pennsylvania sky. Down the hall, Caleb sat curled in a chair near the nurse's station, wrapped in the thin blanket, fighting sleep. Samuel saw Angela glance toward him. You should take your boy home, he whispered. Angela looked back at the letter. I will. You missed the bus because of me. No, she said gently. I missed the bus because someone needed me. Samuel closed his eyes. That is a heavy thing to need. Angela did not answer. She knew need could feel heavy to people who had spent their whole lives trying not to become a burden. She looked down at the first line. My dearest Samuel. At those 3 words, Samuel's breathing changed. His face softened in a way Angela had never seen before. The guarded, difficult old man disappeared for a moment, and in his place was a husband listening for the voice of the woman he had loved most in the world. Angela read slowly. Evelyn had written from a hospital bed 7 years earlier. Her words were plain, tender, and brave. She reminded Samuel of their first apartment, the maple tree outside the kitchen window, the morning he burned toast and tried to scrape off the black edges before she saw it. She wrote about the county fair, about winter evenings, about how he always pretended not to cry during old hymns. Samuel's lips trembled. She remembered everything, he said. Love does that, Angela replied. She kept reading. If I must leave before you, Sam, promise me you will not become a locked house. Promise me you will let someone sit on the porch of your heart. Angela paused. Samuel turned his face toward the window. I did exactly what she asked me not to do. Grief can do that to people. No, he whispered. Pride did. Grief was only the excuse. Angela let the silence rest between them. Then Samuel said, after Evelyn passed, people came for a while. Neighbors. Church friends. A cousin from Erie. Then the visits became shorter. The calls became fewer. After some time, I stopped answering before they stopped calling. It felt better to pretend I had chosen loneliness. Angela lowered the letter. In the hallway, Caleb stirred, then stood with the blanket around his shoulders. He walked quietly to the doorway. Angela saw him. Caleb, baby, wait outside. It's okay, he whispered. Samuel looked at the boy. Caleb's red hoodie was too large. His eyes were sleepy but serious. He looked at the old man's thin hands, then at the letter in his mother's lap. Is that from your wife? Caleb asked softly. Samuel nodded. My mama reads letters good, Caleb said. She makes them sound like the person is still there. Angela's throat tightened. Samuel stared at the child as if those simple words had reached a place even Evelyn's letter had not. She does, he whispered. Caleb stepped beside Angela's chair and placed one small hand on the blanket near Samuel's arm, not too close. Just close enough to say he was not afraid. Angela continued reading. My love, Evelyn had written near the end, when your last night comes, I hope you are not alone, but if I cannot be there, I pray God sends you someone with kind hands. The room became very still. Samuel looked at Angela, then he looked at Caleb. A tear slipped down his temple and disappeared into his silver hair. Read that again, he said. Angela did. This time, Samuel reached for her hand. After a moment, Caleb placed his small hand over both of theirs, old, young, black, white, poor, forgotten, tired, afraid. In that quiet room, none of those words mattered more than mercy. For the first time in many years, Samuel Price was not alone, and as Angela folded Evelyn's letter back along its worn creases, Samuel looked toward the bedside drawer. Nurse Reed, he whispered, his voice thin but certain. Would you bring me paper? Angela looked at him carefully. Of course. Samuel closed his eyes, holding her hand a little tighter. There is one more letter I need to write before morning. Angela found a notepad in the nurse's station drawer, the kind used for shift reminders, supply requests, and messages that rarely reached the people meant to read them. She took a black pen from beside the phone and paused for a moment, looking down the hallway. Caleb had returned to the chair near the nurse's station. His small body was folded under the thin blanket, his red hood pulled up. His face turned toward room 214 as if he wanted to make sure his mother was still there. Angela wished she could give him a warm bed, a quiet house, and a morning that did not begin with tired eyes. Instead, she had given him a lesson no child should have to learn so young. Sometimes love meant waiting in uncomfortable places while someone else needed help. She carried the notepad into Samuel's room. He was weaker now. His breathing had changed, becoming uneven, like a man walking slowly through deep snow. The letter from Evelyn lay on his chest, one corner tucked beneath his hand. The brass pocket watch sat beside the lamp, its cover slightly open, revealing a faded photograph of a woman with soft eyes and a careful smile. Evelyn. Angela placed the notepad on the tray table and adjusted it over the bed. Do you want me to call the doctor? She asked. Samuel shook his head. Not yet. The charge nurse? No. His eyes moved toward the hallway. They will come when there is nothing left to do. Angela understood what he meant. There was a kind of care that arrived only for paperwork. Samuel lifted the pen, but his fingers trembled too much. The pen slipped against the page and left a crooked black mark. He stared at it. Ashamed, Angela gently picked up the pen. You can tell me. I'll write. Samuel looked at her. You have already done enough. No, Angela said softly. I've done what someone should have done. For a moment, Samuel's face folded with something deeper than gratitude. He looked like a man standing at the edge of a long road, seeing at last where it had led. Write this at the top, he whispered. To whom it may concern, Angela wrote the words. Samuel closed his eyes, gathering breath. My name is Samuel Everett Price. I am 87 years old, and I am of sound mind. Tonight, I am dying in room 214 at Maple Haven Care Center. I am not afraid of death. I am afraid of what I have seen people become when no one is watching. Angela's pen slowed. Samuel opened his eyes. Keep writing, she did. He spoke carefully, each sentence costing him something. I have watched residents without family wait hours longer than others. I have watched call lights blink until people stopped pressing them. I have heard staff speak of empty rooms before the people inside them were gone. I have been called difficult because I asked to be seen as a man, not a chart. Angela swallowed, but her hand did not stop. This was not anger in Samuel's voice. It was witness, the steady, sorrowful truth of someone who had spent his last months listening. And tonight, he continued, after her shift ended, Nurse Angela Reed stayed. At the sound of her name, Angela looked up. Samuel did not. She had a child waiting. She had a bus to catch. She had every reason to leave. But when I asked not to die alone, she sat beside me. She read my Evelyn's letter. She held my hand as if an old man still had worth. Her son stood beside me as if kindness was the most natural thing in the world. Angela's eyes burned. Mr. Price? Write it, he whispered. She lowered her gaze and wrote. Samuel breathed shallowly for several seconds before speaking again. If this facility remembers anything about me, let it not be my room number, my unpaid balance, or the inconvenience of my final night. Let it remember this. No person should leave this world as if they were a task no one wanted to finish. The room grew silent except for the scratching of Angela's pen. Samuel turned his head slightly toward the pocket watch. "There is a second envelope in my suitcase," he said. "Brown leather case, left side. Under the blue sweater." Angela looked toward the closet. "What is it?" "A beginning," Samuel said. She did not understand. He gave the smallest smile. "Most people think letters are endings. They are wrong. The right letter can open a door that has been locked for 20 years. Angela felt a chill move through her, though the room was warm. Samuel's eyes found hers. "When morning comes, a man named Thomas Holloway will arrive. He is my attorney. Give him this letter. Only him." Angela nodded slowly. "All right, and Angela—" "Yes?" His voice thinned to almost nothing. "When they tell you that you were only doing your job, do not believe them." She could not speak. Samuel looked past her toward the hallway where Caleb slept beneath the thin blanket. "You gave your son a hard night," he whispered, "but you gave him a holy memory." Angela closed her eyes for 1 second. Holding back tears, she did not have time to cry. Then Samuel took one more breath and said, "Now write the last line." She placed the pen to the page. Samuel whispered, "Start with her." Angela looked at him. "Start what?" But Samuel only closed his eyes, Evelyn's letter beneath his hand, and the brass watch ticking softly beside him. Angela sat very still, the unfinished question hanging between them, and in the quiet before dawn, she realized the final letter was not just a farewell. It was a key. For a while, Angela did not move. The notepad rested in her lap. Samuel's final words sat unfinished on the page, dark and trembling in black ink. "Start with her." Angela did not know who he meant. Evelyn, herself. Some forgotten patient from long ago, or perhaps all of them. Samuel lay with his eyes closed, one hand resting on Evelyn's letter, the other still loosely holding Angela's fingers. His breathing came in uneven waves now. Each breath seemed to travel a long distance before reaching him. Angela checked the clock. 2:17 a.m. The last bus was long gone. Caleb would miss a full night of sleep. Angela would have to get him home somehow before morning, change his clothes, pack his school bag, and walk him into class with a smile that said everything was fine. But nothing about the night felt fine. It felt important. She placed Samuel's letter carefully inside a clean envelope and wrote his name across the front. Samuel Everett Price, room 214. Then she stood and moved to the closet. The brown leather suitcase was exactly where he had said it would be, tucked beneath a thin winter coat. Angela hesitated before touching it. Opening a dying man's suitcase felt too private, almost like stepping into the last room of his life. But Samuel had asked. Inside were folded shirts, a pair of polished dress shoes, a shaving kit, and a blue sweater that smelled faintly of cedar and old soap. Beneath it lay a sealed envelope. On the front, in careful handwriting, were the words, "For Thomas Holloway." Angela lifted it with both hands. It was heavier than a normal letter. Something inside had the thickness of legal paper. Behind her, Samuel stirred. "Did you find it?" he whispered. "Yes, keep it safe." "I will." He opened his eyes. "They may not like what it says." Angela looked toward the hallway. "Who?" Samuel gave a tired smile. "People who have grown comfortable doing less than what is right." Before Angela could answer, footsteps sounded outside the room. Nurse Denise Parker, the charge nurse, appeared in the doorway with a tablet in her hand and irritation already written across her face. "Angela," she said, lowering her voice but not her judgment, "why are you still here?" Angela stood beside Samuel's bed. "Mr. Price needed someone." Denise glanced at Samuel, then at the chair, the letter, and finally down the hall where Caleb slept under the blanket. "You missed your bus for this?" Samuel's eyes opened a little wider. Angela did not look away. "For him," Denise sighed. "Angela, I understand you care, but you can't keep creating these situations. Bringing your child here is already against policy." The word policy landed coldly in the room. Samuel turned his head toward her. "Does policy sit with a man when he is afraid?" Denise stiffened. "Mr. Price, you should rest." "I was resting," he whispered, "until I remembered I was still alive." Angela felt the sentence strike the room like a small bell. Denise's face changed, but only for a second. Then the professional mask returned. "I'll document that he was attended to," she said. "No," Samuel replied, his voice thin but clear. "Document that she stayed." Denise looked at Angela as if this was now her fault too. Angela kept her voice calm. "I'm not leaving him alone. You are off the clock. I know. You will not be paid for this. I know." Denise lowered her tablet. "Then why?" Angela looked at Samuel, at the envelope on the tray table, at the brass pocket watch beside the lamp. "Because dying should not be treated like an inconvenience." For the first time, Denise had no quick answer. From the hallway, Caleb's small voice came softly. "Mama." Angela turned. He stood near the nurse's station, blanket around his shoulders, eyes half asleep and worried. Denise looked at him with disapproval. This is exactly what I mean. Angela stepped into the doorway before Denise could say more. Caleb is not the problem, she said quietly. There was no anger in her voice. That made it stronger. He is a child who had nowhere safe to go tonight. Mr. Price is a man who had no one safe to stay. Maybe before we talk about policy, we should ask why both of those things are true in the same building. Denise stared at her. Samuel closed his eyes, and a faint smile touched his mouth. Caleb walked to his mother's side and slipped his hand into hers. No one spoke. Some silences shame people, others wake them. At last, Denise looked away. I'll check back later. She left without another word. Angela stood still until the footsteps faded. Then Samuel whispered, "You see it now." Angela turned back to him. "See what?" "That kindness is not small," he said. "It threatens anything built without it." Angela sat beside him again. The sky outside the window had begun to pale at the edges, though morning had not yet arrived. Samuel's breathing grew softer, further away. Angela placed one hand over his and kept the sealed envelope close. Caleb leaned against her shoulder, too tired to speak. In that quiet room, with snow pressed against the glass and dawn waiting beyond the dark, Angela understood that something had shifted. Samuel's last letter was no longer just his truth. It had become a witness. And when morning came, someone would have to answer for what it had seen. By 4:09 a.m., the snow had stopped falling. The world outside Samuel Price's window lay white and still, as if Pennsylvania itself were holding its breath. Inside room 214, the machines continued their small, steady sounds, but even they seemed quieter now, as though they understood. They were no longer the most important thing in the room. Angela sat beside Samuel's bed with Caleb asleep against her shoulder. The boy's breathing was warm against her sleeve. His hand still rested near Samuel's blanket, small fingers curled loosely, as if even in sleep he had chosen to stay. Angela's arm ached from holding him upright, and her back throbbed from the long shift, but she did not move. Some moments asked a person to be still. Samuel opened his eyes. They were dimmer now, but clear. "Is the boy asleep?" he whispered. Angela looked down at Caleb. "Yes." Samuel nodded faintly. "Good, children should sleep when they can." Angela tried to smile. "So should old men." A shadow of humor passed over his face. "I have slept enough in this place." Then his gaze moved toward the brass pocket watch on the table. Angela picked it up and placed it in his hand. The watch was old, its surface scratched, its hinge loose from years of opening and closing. Inside the cover was the tiny photograph of Evelyn, her hair pinned back, her smile gentle and knowing. Samuel touched the photograph with his thumb. "She hated having her picture taken," he said. Said photographs made people pretend to be still when nobody really was. Angela looked at the small image. She was beautiful. She was stubborn. Samuel whispered, "That was better." Angela laughed softly despite the tears gathering behind her eyes. Samuel heard it and seemed pleased. "She would have liked you," he said. Angela lowered her gaze. "I wish I could have met her." "You did, in a way." Angela did not understand. Samuel's fingers tightened around the watch. "Every time someone stays when they could leave, Evelyn is in the room." The words settled over Angela with a tenderness that almost hurt. For years, she had thought kindness was something she had to hide inside tired hours. A blanket pulled higher, a cup of water, a hand held after a shift ended. Small things, unseen things, things that did not change rent, bills, bus schedules, or the way people looked at her worn shoes. But Samuel spoke of kindness as if it were inheritance, as if it passed from one hand to another, surviving the people who first gave it. His breathing hitched. Angela sat forward. "Mr. Price, I am here. Do you want me to call someone?" He shook his head. "You already did." "I did?" Samuel looked toward the ceiling, but his eyes seemed to see beyond it. "You called her back to me." Angela's throat closed. For a few minutes, there were no words. Then Samuel whispered, "Read the last line again." Angela reached for Evelyn's letter. The paper was warm now from having rested beneath his hand. She unfolded it carefully and found the sentence near the bottom. "When your last night comes, I hope you are not alone. But if I cannot be there, I pray God sends you someone with kind hands." Samuel closed his eyes as she read. Caleb stirred against Angela's shoulder but did not wake. Samuel's hand moved weakly over the blanket. Searching, Angela placed her hand in his. He turned his head slightly toward her. "Tell your son," he whispered, "that he was brave." "I will." "Tell him a man should never be ashamed to be gentle." Angela looked down at Caleb, his face soft with sleep. "I'll tell him that, too." Samuel drew a shallow breath. "And you, Nurse Reed, I'm here. You must not let them make you small." Angela blinked hard. "All my life," Samuel said, "I thought money built things, buildings, names, foundations. But tonight I learned something I should have known sooner." His voice faded. Angela leaned closer. What did you learn? That mercy builds what money can only protect. The room went still. Outside, the first pale hint of morning touched the window. Samuel looked once more at Evelyn's photograph. A tear slipped from the corner of his eye, but his face was no longer afraid. Evelyn, he whispered. Angela held his hand with both of hers. I'm right here, Mr. Price. I know, he said. Then he smiled, not at Angela, not at the room, but at something just beyond it. His fingers relaxed. The brass pocket watch remained open in his palm. For a moment, Angela could not move. She sat there with Caleb leaning against her, Samuel's hand growing still in hers, and Evelyn's letter lying open across the blanket like a prayer that had found its answer. No alarm sounded. No dramatic cry filled the hallway. Samuel Price left the world quietly, with his name spoken, his hand held, and the face of his wife beside him. Angela bowed her head. Rest now, she whispered. Caleb woke just enough to ask, Mama. Angela wrapped one arm around him. He's not scared anymore, she said. Down the hall, the morning shift began to arrive. Shoes squeaked on polished floors. Phones rang. Coffee brewed. The ordinary world returned, unaware that something sacred had happened in room 214. Angela looked at the sealed envelope on the tray table. Samuel's final letter waited there, silent and heavy, and beyond the glass doors of Maple Haven, a black car was pulling into the parking lot. The black car stopped near the front entrance just as the first shift nurses were removing their winter gloves and shaking snow from their shoes. Angela saw it through the window of room 214. She had not moved far from Samuel's bedsides. Caleb sat quietly in the corner chair, wrapped in the thin blanket, his red hoodie pulled over his head. His eyes were open now, but he did not speak. Children sometimes understood sacred silence better than adults. Samuel Price lay still beneath the clean white sheet. Angela had washed his face, combed his silver hair, and placed Evelyn's letter over his chest. The brass pocket watch rested beside his hand, open to the faded photograph of the woman he had loved for more years than loneliness had been able to steal. No one had asked Angela to do those things. That was exactly why she had done them. In the hallway, voices grew louder. Who called administration? Did room 214 pass? Where's Denise? Why is Angela still here? Angela closed at her eye for one breath. The night had ended, but the weight of it had not. Nurse Denise Parker arrived first, carrying her tablet and the stiff expression of someone already worried about documentation. Behind her stood two morning nurses, both young, both suddenly quiet when they saw Samuel's room. Denise looked at the bed, then at Angela. What time did he pass? About 4:36, Angela said. Was anyone notified? Angela glanced at the sealed envelope on the tray table. He asked me to give this to his attorney. Denise frowned. His attorney? Before Angela could answer, a tall white man in his late 60s appeared at the doorway. He wore a black wool coat, polished shoes, and silver-rimmed glasses. Snow clung to his shoulders. In one hand, he carried a leather briefcase, in the other, a folded newspaper he had not read. His face changed when he saw the bed. He removed his hat. I am Thomas Holloway, he said quietly. I represented Mr. Samuel Price for 31 years. The room went still. Denise straightened. Mr. Holloway, I'm Nurse Parker, charge nurse. We weren't aware, Mr. Price had active legal representation. That does not surprise me, Holloway replied. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it, the kind made sharper by years of watching powerful people mistake politeness for weakness. He stepped inside and looked at Samuel. For a moment, he was not an attorney. He was an old friend standing at the last shore. Sam, he whispered. Angela lowered her eyes. Holloway noticed Evelyn's letter on Samuel's chest. Then he saw the pocket watch. Then Caleb in the corner, small and silent beneath the blanket. His gaze returned to Angela. You must be Nurse Reed. Angela felt Denise turn sharply toward her. Yes, sir. Holloway reached into his coat and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. Mr. Price told me if he did not make it through the night, I was to come at dawn and ask one question. Angela's hands tightened. What question? Was he alone? No one in the room seemed to breathe. Angela looked at Samuel, then at Caleb. No, she said, he was not alone. Holloway closed his eyes briefly, and the sternness in his face softened into relief. Thank God. Denise cleared her throat. Mr. Holloway, perhaps we should discuss this in administration. We will, he said. But first, Mr. Price left instructions. Angela picked up the sealed envelope from the tray table. He asked me to give this only to you. Holloway accepted it with both hands. When he saw Samuel's handwriting, his mouth tightened. He wrote this tonight? Angela nodded. He dictated most of it. I wrote the words he gave me. Denise stepped forward. If this concerns the facility, we may need to review. No, Holloway said. The single word was not loud, but it stopped her. This letter belongs to Mr. Price's estate until I determine otherwise. Denise's face paled slightly. Holloway opened the envelope and read in silence. At first, nothing changed. Then his eyes slowed, his jaw tightened. Once, he looked up at Angela with something like sorrow. Then he looked down again and continued. The young nurses in the hallway stopped whispering. Angela could hear the clock above the nurses' station. She could hear Caleb breathing. She could hear, somewhere far away, a breakfast cart beginning its rounds as if the world did not know that a dead man had just started speaking. When Holloway finished, he folded the pages carefully. Mr. Price was very clear. Denise forced a professional smile. About what? Holloway looked at her. About the difference between care and custody. The words landed heavily. He turned to Angela. Nurse Reed, did Mr. Price ask for a second envelope? Angela remembered the brown leather suitcase, the blue sweater, the sealed envelope that felt too heavy for ordinary paper. Yes. Where is it? Angela retrieved it from the bedside drawer where she had locked it away during Samuel's final hour. Holloway took it but did not open it yet. Instead, he looked around room 214, at Samuel, at Evelyn's letter, at the chair where Angela had sat past the end of her shift, and at the tired child who had watched his mother choose mercy over comfort. Then he faced Denise and the two nurses in the doorway. Administration should be called now, he said. Not later now. Denise swallowed. Is something wrong? Holloway looked down at Samuel's final letter. Yes, he said, and according to Mr. Price, it has been wrong for a very long time. Angela felt Caleb slip his hand into hers. She looked down at her son. His fingers were cold but steady in that moment. She understood what Samuel had meant. The letter was not an ending. It was a door opening, and everyone in Maple Haven was about to hear it creak. By 6:15 that morning, the conference room at Maple Haven Care Center had never felt so small. The long table was polished, the coffee was fresh, and the framed mission statement on the wall used words like dignity, compassion, and family. Angela had passed that sign hundreds of times during night shifts. She had always wondered why the words looked so clean on the wall and so tired in the hallways. Now she sat at the far end of the table with Caleb beside her. He had refused to wait outside. Angela had tried to tell him this was grown-up business, but Caleb had only looked at her with sleepy, serious eyes and said, "I was there too, Mama." So he stayed. Thomas Holloway sat across from Administrator Richard Bell, a smooth-faced man in a navy suit who had arrived in a hurry, smelling faintly of aftershave and panic. Beside him sat Denise Parker, her tablet resting untouched in front of her. Two department supervisors stood near the wall, silent and uncomfortable. No one had offered Angela coffee. Holloway opened his briefcase and placed Samuel's final letter on the table. "I will read Mr. Price's statement exactly as he intended," he said. Richard Bell adjusted his tie. "Mr. Holloway, before we begin, let me say how saddened we are by Mr. Price's passing. Maple Haven takes great pride in Mr. Bell." Holloway interrupted. "Samuel Price is no longer in need of your pride." The room went quiet. Angela looked down at Caleb's hand resting on his knee. His fingers were curled tight. Holloway put on his glasses and began to read. "My name is Samuel Everett Price. I am 87 years old, and tonight I am dying in room 214 at Maple Haven Care Center. I am not afraid of death. I am afraid of what I have seen people become when no one is watching." Denise lowered her eyes. Richard Bell's face stiffened. Holloway continued. "I have watched residents without family wait longer than others. I have watched call lights blink until people stopped pressing them. I have heard rooms discussed as numbers, not lives. I have heard staff speak of empty beds before the people inside them were gone." Angela felt the room tighten around those words. They were not shouted. That made them more powerful. Samuel had written like a man placing stones on a grave, one by one, each one carrying the weight of truth. Holloway turned the page. "I do not accuse every hand in this building of cruelty. Some hands are kind. Some are tired. Some are asked to do too much with too little. But a system that depends on exhaustion and calls it efficiency will eventually forget the souls it was built to serve." Angela swallowed. That was Samuel. Even in his last hours, he had made room for mercy. Richard Bell leaned forward. "This is a very emotional statement from a man in a vulnerable condition. We should be careful about treating it as what?" Holloway asked. Richard stopped. "As evidence," Holloway said. Mr. Price anticipated that. He reached into the second envelope. Angela saw papers inside, copies. Dates, notes, names. Holloway spread them across the table. "For the past 3 months," he said, "Mr. Price kept records, call light times, missed meal assistance, residents with no family contacts, staff shortages, complaints that were marked resolved but never investigated. Denise stared at the documents. Angela did too. Samuel had been quiet, not unaware. He had been dying, not blind. Holloway placed one final page in front of Richard Bell. "And this is a condition, Mr. Price added to a charitable endowment he arranged before his passing. Richard's expression changed. "Endowment? Yes," Holloway said. "Mr. Price left a substantial fund for end-of-life dignity care. But Maple Havens will receive nothing unless it agrees to an independent review and creates a permanent program ensuring that no resident dies alone when companionship is desired." No one spoke. Caleb looked up at his mother. Angela could hardly breathe. Holloway continued. "Mr. Price named the program himself." He looked at Angela then. "No one leaves alone." The words moved through her like a hymn. Richard Bell sat back slowly. And who, exactly, would oversee such a program? Holloway did not hesitate. "Angela Reed." Denise looked up. Angela's face warmed. "Me? Not as an administrator at first," Holloway clarified. "As the founding care coordinator with paid training, salary protection, and oversight from the Ombudsman's office." Mr. Price was very specific. Angela sat very still. For years, people had seen her faded scrubs before they saw her hands. They had seen the bus pass, the old cardigan, the child waiting in the break room. They had seen struggle and mistaken it for weakness. But Samuel had seen her clearly. Holloway lifted Samuel's final letter again and read the last paragraph. "If this building wants to learn dignity, start with the woman who gave it freely when no one was watching. Start with Nurse Angela Reed. She knows the difference between checking a room and entering a life." Angela could not speak. Caleb slipped his hand into hers beneath the table. Richard Bell looked from Holloway to Angela. His voice came out carefully now. "Nurse Reed, perhaps we should discuss your availability for this role." Angela looked at him. Only hours earlier, policy had been used like a wall against her. Now the same people wanted to open a door because a dead man had left them no choice. She thought of Samuel's final breath, Evelyn's letter, Caleb's tired little feet on the cold floor, the blinking call light above room 214. Then Angela said quietly, "I will discuss it." Richard seemed relieved, but she was not finished. "After the independent review begins." The room went silent again. Holloway smiled faintly. Angela sat straighter, still tired, still poor, still wearing faded blue scrubs, but something in her had changed, not into pride, not into anger, into steadiness. Samuel Price had left behind more than a letter. He had left behind a witness, and now at last the witness had a voice. For the first time in 6 years, Angela Reed walked through Maple Haven Care Center and felt the hallway look back at her. Not kindly, not cruelly, carefully. By 8 o'clock that morning, the news had moved faster than any official memo. Samuel Price had left a letter. Samuel Price had kept records. Samuel Price had named Angela Reed. And now the woman most people had overlooked in faded blue scrubs had become the center of a conversation no one in administration could control. Angela could feel the shift in every doorway. The younger nurses stopped whispering when she passed. A dietary aide gave her a small nod near the elevator. Mr. Campos in room 211 reached out from his wheelchair and touched her sleeve. "I heard you stayed with Sam," he said. Angela knelt beside him. He was not alone. Mr. Campos looked toward the end of the hall where room 214 stood with its door half closed. "Good," he whispered. A man should leave with someone knowing his name. Angela could only nod. Caleb walked beside her, still wrapped in the blanket, his backpack hanging from one shoulder. He looked exhausted, but he did not complain. Once, near the nurse's station, he reached for her hand. "Are you in trouble, Mama?" Angela looked down at him. His red hoodie was wrinkled from sleep. His eyes were too serious for a 9-year-old boy. "No, baby." "Then why does everybody look scared?" Angela followed his gaze. Nurse Denise Parker stood near the medication cart, holding her tablet, but not using it. Her face carried the grayness of someone who had begun to remember things she wished she had noticed sooner. "Sometimes," Angela said softly, "people get scared when the truth walks into the room." Caleb thought about that. Like Mr. Samuel's letter? Yes. Denise heard his name and looked over. For a second, Angela expected the old sharpness. Instead, Denise stepped toward them. "Angela." Her voice was lower than usual. Angela waited. Denise glanced at Caleb, then back at her. "I need to say something." The hallway seemed to quiet. "I was wrong last night," Denise said. "About him, about your son, about you." Angela did not answer right away. Apologies were difficult things. Some were doors. Some were rugs placed over broken floors. Denise swallowed. "I kept telling myself we were understaffed, that everyone was tired, that policies had to matter because without them the place would fall apart." Angela's voice stayed gentle. "Policies do matter." Denise looked at her. But people matter first. The words did not shame her. That was why they reached her. Denise nodded slowly. I forgot that. Caleb looked up. Mr. Samuel didn't. Denise's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. No, she whispered. He didn't. At the end of the hall, Thomas Holloway came out of room 214 carrying Samuel's brown leather suitcase. His black coat was folded over one arm now, and he looked older in the daylight. Mrs. Reed, he said. Angela turned. I need to speak with you privately when you are ready. Angela glanced at Caleb. Holloway's expression softened. Your son may come. Mr. Price mentioned him too. Caleb straightened a little, startled by the dignity of being included. They followed Holloway into the small family room near the chapel. It was meant for difficult conversations, though Angela had rarely seen families use it. Too often, the people who needed that room most had no one to sit with them there. Holloway placed the suitcase on the table. Samuel asked me to give you this after the first letter had been read. Angela felt her chest tighten. What is it? Part of the endowment documents, he said, and one personal item. He opened the suitcase and removed a sealed cream envelope. On the front, in Samuel's careful handwriting, was her name, Angela Reed. Caleb leaned closer. Angela did not open it immediately. Something about seeing her name in Samuel's hand made the room feel smaller, more intimate, as if the old man had not truly left. As if he were still sitting beside her in room 214, teaching her that a final letter could become a beginning. Holloway spoke quietly. Mr. Price wrote many letters over the years. Some funded scholarships, some supported hospice volunteers, some paid bills for people who never knew his name. Angela looked up. Scholarships? Yes, Holloway said. After Evelyn passed, Samuel created a private fund in her memory. He said a nurse with kind hands had sat with her at the end. He wanted more people like that in the world. Angela's fingers went cold. For reasons she could not explain, a memory rose inside her. A younger version of herself standing outside a nursing school office 20 years ago, trying not to cry because she could not pay her final semester balance. A clerk had handed her a note from someone who was once saved by a nurse. Angela had kept that note for years. Her voice came out thin. What was the name of the fund? Holloway looked at her with a sadness so gentle it felt like mercy. The Evelyn Price Nursing Fund. Angela stopped breathing. Caleb looked between them. Mama? But Angela was no longer fully in the room. She was 22 again, wearing thrift store shoes, holding a tuition bill she could not pay, believing her dream was over. Then came the anonymous gift. The balance cleared. The door reopened. She became a nurse because someone unseen had believed a poor young woman still belonged in the work of healing. Her hands trembled as she opened Samuel's envelope. Inside was a copy of an old scholarship document. Her name was printed across the top. Angela Reed, Nursing Program Tuition Assistance, Anonymous Donor, and beneath it, in blue ink, was the signature she now knew, Samuel Everett Price. The room blurred. Angela pressed the paper to her chest. All night she had believed she was sitting beside a stranger, but the stranger had once helped carry her future. Caleb wrapped his arms around her waist. Angela bowed her head over him, and for the first time since Samuel's passing she cried. Not loudly, not brokenly. She cried the way a person cries when life finally reveals that kindness is never lost. It only waits for the right hands to carry it forward. By the time Angela walked out of the family room, the old scholarship paper was still pressed against her chest. Caleb held her other hand. Neither of them spoke for a while. The hallway outside seemed different now. The same polished floor, the same pale walls, the same call lights above the same doors. But Angela could no longer see Maple Haven as only the place where she worked nights for too little pay and too many tired hours. It had become the place where a circle had closed. 20 years ago, Samuel Price had reached into the life of a poor young woman he had never met and helped her become a nurse. Then, on the final night of his life, that same nurse had sat beside him when the world had forgotten to be kind. Angela had thought mercy moved in one direction. Now she understood it was more like a river. It left one shore, disappeared through years and grief and ordinary days, then returned where it was needed most. Near the nurse's station, Denise Parker stood with red eyes and a folder in her hands. Angela, she said softly. The state ombudsman's office is sending someone this afternoon. Angela looked at Thomas Holloway. He nodded. Samuel's records were detailed enough to require an independent review. Administration has agreed to cooperate. Behind the glass office wall, Richard Bell was on the phone. His face had lost its polished confidence. He looked less like a man protecting an institution and more like a man listening to the walls speak back. Angela felt no pleasure in it. That surprised her. Part of her could have been satisfied to watch the people who dismissed her become uncomfortable. But Samuel's letter had not asked for revenge. It had asked for witness. It had asked for dignity. It had asked for the building to remember why it existed. Mr. Campos rolled slowly toward her in his wheelchair. "Is it true?" he asked. Angela knelt beside him. "What did you hear?" "That Sam left money so nobody has to go alone." Angela nodded. "Yes, Mr. Campos looked down the hall toward room 214. "He never said much." "No," Angela said, "but he saw a lot." The old man's mouth trembled. "My daughter lives in Arizona. She calls when she can. I tell her I'm fine even when I'm not, because I don't want her flying across the country every time I get scared." Angela placed a hand over his. "You should not have to pretend." His eyes filled. "None of us should." That afternoon, 2 reviewers arrived. A silver-haired woman named Patricia Bellamy from the Long-Term Care Ombudsman's office and a quiet man from the county health department. They did not come in loudly. They came with notebooks, badges, and the calm seriousness of people trained to listen beyond prepared statements. They interviewed staff. They examined call logs. They read complaint forms. They spoke with residents who had no family nearby, residents who had learned to lower their expectations until loneliness felt normal. By evening, the truth had begun to surface. It was not one monstrous act. That would have been easier for Maple Haven to deny or punish. It was smaller and worse: delayed responses, dismissed requests, understaffed nights, rushed meals, lonely final hours, and a culture that had grown used to calling neglect by gentler names. Efficiency, policy, short staffing, reality. Angela sat across from Patricia Bellamy in the chapel room while Caleb slept beside her, his head on his backpack. "Miss Reed," Patricia said, "Mr. Price named you as the recommended founding coordinator for the new End-of-Life Dignity program. Do you understand what that means?" Angela looked through the small window toward the hallway. A call light blinked above room 209. This time, someone answered it quickly. "I understand what he wanted," Angela said. "And what do you want?" The question was simple. No one had asked Angela that in a long time. She looked at Caleb. She thought of rent, bills, buses, and the shame of being treated as if poverty were a character flaw. She thought of Samuel's hand in hers, Evelyn's letter, the scholarship document, the final sentence that had changed everything. Start with her. Now she knew what Samuel meant. Start with the person everyone overlooked. Start with the nurse who still remembered that care was not only medicine. Start with the hand that stayed. Angela turned back to Patricia. "I want this program to be real," she said. "Not a poster, not a press release. Real." Patricia's eyes sharpened with respect. "What would real look like?" Angela did not hesitate. "It means every resident gets asked who they want called when they are declining. It means volunteers are trained, not just assigned. It means no one without family is treated as less urgent. It means night shift has enough staff to answer fear, not only emergencies." She paused. "And it means the people doing the caring are cared for too. You cannot build dignity on exhausted backs and unpaid hours." Patricia wrote that down. For the first time all day, Angela felt Samuel near her, not as memory but as courage. Later that evening, Richard Bell called a staff meeting in the dining hall. The room filled slowly. Nurses, aides, kitchen workers, cleaners, supervisors, people who had whispered about Angela now stood with their arms folded, waiting. Richard cleared his throat. "Effective immediately, Maple Haven will begin an independent review and launch the No One Leaves Alone program under the guidance of Nurse Angela Reed, with oversight from the State Ombudsman's office and Mr. Price's estate." A murmur moved through the room. Angela stepped forward. Her scrubs were still faded, her shoes were still worn, her son still slept in a chair by the wall. But when she spoke, her voice did not shake. "This is not about blaming one person," she said. "It is about refusing to let any person become invisible." The room quieted. Samuel Price died with someone holding his hand. That should not be extraordinary. That should be the standard. Denise looked down, tears on her face. Angela continued. "If we do this right, his last night will not be remembered as the night Maple Haven was exposed. It will be remembered as the night Maple Haven began again." No one clapped at first, then Mr. Campos raised one trembling hand from his wheelchair and began one clap, then another. Soon the dining hall filled with a sound that was not celebration exactly. It was recognition. Angela looked toward Caleb. He was awake now, watching her with proud, tired eyes, and for the first time in many years, Angela Reed did not feel like a woman merely surviving the night. She felt like morning had finally learned her name. 3 months later, room 214 no longer looked the same. The walls had been repainted a warmer shade of cream. A small lamp stood near the bed instead of the harsh overhead light. There was a wooden chair beside the window, a shelf of donated books, and a framed photograph of a maple tree in winter. But the most important change was on the door. A small brass plaque read, "No one leaves alone." Angela Reed stood in the hallway and touched the edge of the plaque with her fingertips. She still wore blue scrubs, though they were new now, deep navy instead of faded from too many washings. Her shoes were still practical, her hair was still pulled into a neat low bun. She was still 42, still a mother, still a woman who knew the price of groceries, rent, bus fare, and tired mornings. But she no longer walked through Maple Haven as if she needed to make herself smaller. Samuel Price had changed that. Not by making her rich, not by rescuing her from work. He had done something far more lasting. He had placed a light in her hands and trusted her to carry it. The review had not been easy. Some staff resigned, some cried, some defended themselves until the records made defense impossible. Maple Haven was fined, policies were rewritten, staffing was increased on overnight shifts. Every resident now had an end-of-life dignity plan, reviewed monthly, not hidden in a forgotten folder. The change had not healed everything. Some nights were still hard. Some habits tried to return when people grew tired. Some call lights still blinked longer than they should. But now, someone was watching with purpose. Now someone was measuring not only how fast a task was completed, but whether a life had been honored. Volunteers came from churches, schools, retirement groups, and nursing programs. They were trained to sit quietly, read letters, play hymns, call families, hold hands, or simply say a person's name when the room became afraid. Angela led every training herself. She did not teach people how to be heroes, she taught them how to stay. That evening, the first official No One Leaves Alone ceremony was held in the small chapel room near the East Hall. Residents came in wheelchairs. Staff stood along the walls. Caleb sat in the front row wearing a clean white shirt Angela had ironed twice. Thomas Holloway stood near the window, older and softer now, holding Samuel's brass pocket watch in one hand. At the front of the room was a small table. On it lay copies of Evelyn's letter, Samuel's final letter, and the old scholarship document Angela had once pressed to her chest while crying. The originals were kept safely at home, in a blue folder beside Caleb's birth certificate and the note that had changed her life 20 years ago. From someone who was once saved by a nurse. When it was time to speak, Angela stepped forward. For a moment she looked at the faces before her. Mrs. Donnelly with a blanket over her knees, Mr. Campos holding a folded handkerchief, Denise Parker standing in the back, no longer hiding from what she had failed to see. Richard Bell near the doorway, quieter than before, learning that leadership meant listening after the apology ended. Angela took a breath. Samuel Price came to Maple Haven with 2 suitcases, a pocket watch, and no family listed on his chart, she began. But no chart can hold the whole truth of a life. The room grew still. He was a husband, a friend, a witness, a man who loved a woman named Evelyn so deeply that even after she was gone, her kindness continued moving through the world. Angela looked down at the scholarship paper. 20 years ago, when I nearly left nursing school because I could not pay my final semester, someone helped me. I never knew his name. I only knew the note he left behind. Her voice trembled but did not break. That man was Samuel Price. A soft sound moved through the chapel. Angela looked at Caleb, and he smiled through wet eyes. The night Samuel died, I thought I was staying with a stranger. But I was sitting beside the man who had once made sure I could become the nurse who would stay. Thomas Holloway lowered his head. Angela continued. That is what kindness does. It does not disappear. It waits. It travels through years. It returns in ways we cannot plan. And when it comes back to us, we are responsible for passing it on. She turned toward the hallway beyond the chapel doors. Tonight, there are residents in this building who are not afraid because someone answered a call light. There are families who know their loved ones will not be left alone. There are nurses who are finally being asked not only to work harder, but to care better together. She paused. This program began because one man asked a simple thing: please do not let me die alone. It continues because the answer should never depend on whether a person has money, relatives, visitors, or a name people recognize. Denise wiped her cheek. Mr. Campos began clapping first, as he had done before. Soon the chapel filled with quiet applause. After the ceremony, Angela walked alone to room 214. The room was empty for now. Snow touched the window, just as it had on Samuel's last night. She placed Samuel's brass pocket watch on the bedside table. Inside the cover, Evelyn's photograph still smiled. Caleb came to the doorway. "Mama?" Angela turned. "Are you okay?" She looked at the chair where she had sat that night, tired and poor and torn between 2 heartbreaks. Then she looked at her son. "Yes," she said softly. "I think I am." Caleb stepped beside her and slipped his hand into hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the call light above room 209 blinked. Angela looked at it, so did Caleb. This time, before fear could grow in the silence, footsteps moved quickly down the hall. A nurse entered the room. A volunteer followed with a book in her hand. Angela smiled. Somewhere beyond what the living could see, she imagined Samuel hearing it. Not applause, not praise. Just the sound of someone coming when called. And that, Angela thought, was how a building began to heal.